The order came to me at 20 minutes past 4 on a gray October afternoon, and I knew before the man had finished speaking that I was not going to obey it. I want to be precise about that, because in the weeks that followed a great many people asked me how I had decided so quickly, as though there must have been some long reckoning behind my stillness, some private war of conscience fought out behind the blank face they all remembered. There was not. I have stood the Queen's posts for 19 years. You learn in 19 years to feel the shape of a thing before your mind has caught up to naming it, the way a man who has worked stone all his life can lay his palm on a wall and tell you it is about to come down. The order Comptroller Vance brought me that afternoon had that shape. It was about to come down on someone who did not deserve it, and I was the wall. My name is Edrin Marlowe. At the time of which I am writing, I held the rank of Sergeant of the Inner Watch at Harrowgate Palace, which is the seat of the Royal House of Harrowgate and has been for the better part of 400 years, and my post that week was the East Range, the old wing, where the family keeps the rooms nobody photographs. Tourists do not come to the East Range. There are no gilded staterooms there, no thrones under glass, no guides walking backward with umbrellas raised. There are corridors that smell of beeswax and cold stone, and tall, narrow windows that let in a thin northern light, and behind a particular oak door at the end of the longest of those corridors there were, that October, the entire worldly belongings of the Dowager Princess of Harrowgate. You will not have heard of her. That was rather the point of the East Range. The Princess was the late King's elder sister, aunt then, to our present sovereign, Queen Sarahland, and she was 91 years old that autumn and had not left her apartments in nearly 2 years. The kingdom had largely forgotten she existed. The newspapers, when they remembered her at all, called her the recluse princess, which was unkind and also untrue. She was not a recluse. She was simply old and tired and finished with the business of being looked at. I had stood her corridor for the better part of a year by then. I knew the sound of her little brass bell, which she rang when she wanted her nurse. I knew that on clear mornings she had her chair wheeled to the south window so she could watch the rooks come up off the elms. I knew, because her nurse had told me, that she kept her late husband's letters in a sandalwood box on the writing desk and read one of them every Sunday, and that she had done so for 31 years, since the morning they had brought her the news from the mountains. I tell you all of this so that you will understand what Comptroller Vance was asking me to throw away. He came up the East Range corridor at 20 past 4 with 2 footmen behind him and a porter pushing a flat trolley, the kind they use for moving crates, and I heard them before I saw them. The squeak of the trolley wheel, the brisk, overconfident click of Vance's shoes. He was a tall, narrow, immaculate man of perhaps 50, with a face like a closed ledger and the particular smoothness of someone who has spent his whole life being the most important person in any room that does not contain the monarch. He was new. He had been controller of the household for 11 weeks. He had arrived in the summer with excellent references and a manner that made the older staff go quiet when he passed, and in those 11 weeks he had reorganized the silver vaults, dismissed 2 under-gardeners, and made himself, by a process I did not yet understand, the man through whom a surprising amount of palace business now flowed. He stopped in front of me and looked at the door behind me as though it were a stain. "Sergeant Marlowe," he said. He had a good memory for names, I will give him that. "We're clearing these rooms, the Princess apartments. Everything goes." He flicked 2 gloved fingers at the porter. "Crates to the service yard. The household will sort what's saleable from what's refused later, but I want the rooms empty by nightfall." "Stand aside, please." I did not stand aside. "Sir," I said, "the princess is in residence." "The princess," said Comptroller Vance, "has been removed to the Lindenhall convalescent wing this morning on the advice of her physician, where she will receive proper care. Her apartments here are no longer required. I have the household's authority to repurpose them." He produced from inside his coat a single folded sheet of paper and held it up at the level of my chin without offering it to me, the way you show a dog a stick. There, signed. Now stand aside. I looked at the paper. I could see that it bore the household seal, that florid little crest they press into wax for warrants and orders of work, and I could see a signature, though not whose. And I felt the thing come down, that certainty in the chest, ahead of thought, because I had stood that corridor for a year, and the Princess Ushold had not been removed anywhere that morning. I had come on watch at noon. The nurse, Mrs. Aldous, had passed me at 1:30 carrying the lunch tray back to the kitchens, and she had told me the princess was sleeping and that I should keep the corridor quiet, and that had been 3 hours ago, and no one had wheeled a 91-year-old woman past me in a chair. I would have heard the chair. I would have heard the bell. I had heard nothing but the rooks. "Sir," I said, "with respect, the princess has not left these apartments today. I've been on this post since noon." Something moved in Comptroller Vance's face. It was very quick and very small, and if I had not spent 19 years learning to read the small movements of men who would rather I could not, I would have missed it. It was not anger. Anger I could have managed. Anger is loud and clumsy and tells you where it is going. This was the other thing. This was the flicker of a man who has just discovered that a door he expected to be open is locked, and is already, in the same half-second, reaching for a different key. "Then your information is out of date," he said smoothly. "These things move quickly. The physician's order came down at 2. Perhaps you were at the far end of the corridor." He had not been told where I was on the corridor. He was guessing, and guessing wrong, because the post is fixed and he should have known that, and a man who runs a household for 11 weeks ought to know where his guards stand. "It hardly matters, Sergeant. The point is the rooms are to be cleared. Now I have given you a lawful order under the household's authority, and I will ask you one final time to stand aside and let these men do their work." The 2 footmen behind him had the careful blankness of servants who would very much rather be somewhere else. The porter had stopped pushing the trolley and was studying the floor. They could all feel it too, I think, that the air in the corridor had gone wrong, the way it goes wrong before weather. I did not move. I stood as I had been trained to stand, weight even, eyes level, my rifle at my shoulder where it had been since noon, and I said the only thing a man in my position is permitted to say, which is also, as it happened, the truth. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that. There are perhaps 4 sentences a guardsman is taught he may speak on his post, and that is one of them. We are not statues, whatever the postcards say. We are men under orders, and the whole architecture of our discipline rests on a single understanding that every sergeant drums into every recruit in his first month. You obey the lawful order instantly and without question, and you do not obey the unlawful one at all. The difficulty, the thing they cannot teach you and you must simply grow, is the judgment that tells the 2 apart in the half-second you are given. Most of a guardsman's career, you will never need it. You stand, you march, you change the watch, and no one ever hands you a thing that is wrong. And then one gray afternoon a smooth man in an excellent coat hands you a folded paper, and the whole 19 years narrows to a point, and you find out what you are made of. Comptroller Vance lowered the paper. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him decide which key to use. "You realize," he said quietly, "that you are refusing a direct instruction from the controller of the household. In this building, Sergeant, I am the household. The catering, the cleaning, the carpenters, the accounts, the order of every room, all of it answers to my office. You answer to my office. Do you understand the position you are putting yourself in?" "I understand it, sir." "Then stand aside." "I can't, sir." "Give me your reason." He said it like a man springing a trap, because of course a guardsman is not supposed to have reasons. A guardsman is supposed to be a door that opens when the right man pushes it. He expected me to have nothing, or to retreat into mute obstinacy he could report as insolence. He did not expect what I gave him. "2 reasons, sir," I said. "The first is that the Princess Ushold has not been moved from these apartments today, and I won't see her rooms cleared while she is still inside them. If I'm wrong about that, It can be settled in 2 minutes by sending someone to the Lindenhall wing to confirm she's there, and I'll stand aside the moment it's confirmed. The second is that an order to discard a member of the royal family's personal property, to send it to the service yard as refuse, is not an order I will carry out on a folded paper I have not been permitted to read, signed by a hand I have not been shown. If that order is real and lawful, sir, then it will survive being checked. If it won't survive being checked, then I was right not to obey it. I have thought a great deal since about why those 2 reasons came out of me so cleanly, in the right order, when my heart was going like a drum. I think it is because they were not really reasons at all. They were the post talking. They were 19 years of standing where I was told and watching who came and went, distilled into the only 2 things I actually knew for certain: that the old woman had not been wheeled past me, and that you do not throw a person's life into a yard on the strength of a paper held an arm's length from your face. The corridor was very quiet. One of the footmen had gone pale. The porter had let go of the trolley entirely. Comptroller Vance smiled. It was not a warm smile, but it was a controlled one, and that frightened me more than rage would have, because it told me he had already let go of the idea of getting through the door this afternoon, and was now thinking about something longer and colder. About me. "You're a careful man, Sergeant Marlowe," he said. "I admire careful men. They're so rarely careful in the right direction." He folded the paper and returned it to his coat, unread, unshown. "Very well. We'll do it your way. I'll send to Lindenhall. I'll bring you a confirmation you can hold in your own hand, and I'll bring the master of the watch with me so that your refusal can be witnessed by your own superior and entered properly in the watch log. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Everything in the log." "Yes, sir," I said, "I would." It was the wrong answer for him, and he knew it, and the smile thinned. He had wanted me to flinch at the mention of the master of the watch, Colonel Bracken, a hard old soldier who had no patience for guardsmen who thought too much. Vance had assumed, reasonably, that a sergeant would dread being made to explain himself to the colonel. What he could not know, because he was 11 weeks in the building and did not yet understand the men he was trying to move, was that Colonel Bracken was the one man in Harrowgate I would have walked a mile to stand in front of just then. Because the colonel had taught me the 4 sentences. The colonel had drummed it into me 20 years ago on a wet parade ground. You do not obey the unlawful order at all. If Vance brought the colonel, then Vance was bringing the very man most likely to tell him to go to the devil. He had reached for a key and picked, without knowing it, the one that opened the door for me. He turned on his heel. "Footman, with me, leave the trolley, we'll want it within the hour." And he walked back down the East Range corridor with that brisk, overconfident click, the 2 footmen trailing him, the porter abandoning his trolley and scuttling after as though afraid to be left behind in the wrongness he had helped to wheel up the hall. I stood alone with the empty trolley and the long, thin October light coming through the narrow windows, and the rooks calling somewhere out over the elms, and behind me, behind the oak door, the small private silence of a 91-year-old woman's rooms. And I will tell you the truth, because there is no point in this account if I dress myself up in it. I was afraid. Not of the door, and not of the trolley, and not even of Colonel Bracken, but of the smile. Because a man who smiles like that when you have just defeated him in front of his own footmen is a man who does not believe he has been defeated at all. He believes he has merely been delayed. And I had been a guardsman long enough to know that the dangerous orders are not the loud ones. The loud ones break against your discipline and run off like rain. The dangerous ones are the quiet ones that come back in a better coat, with a better paper, signed by a better hand, at a time when you are tired and alone, and there is no one in the corridor to witness whether the door opens or not. I checked my watch. 29 minutes past 4. I settled my weight, leveled my eyes, and prepared to do the only thing I knew how to do, which was to stand, and to keep standing, however long it took, however many times he came back, until somebody with the authority to settle it for good came up that corridor and settled it. I did not yet know what was in the rooms behind me. I did not yet know that the smooth man in the excellent coat had not come for an old woman's furniture at all. I did not yet know that the sandalwood box on the writing desk held something that could unmake him, and that by refusing, on instinct, to let his trolley through the door, I had just become the only thing standing between Comptroller Vance and the one secret in Harrowgate he could not afford to let anyone find. I only knew that the order was wrong, and that I would not obey it. That for the moment was enough. He came back at 12 minutes past 5, and he did not come back alone. I heard the click of his shoes first, as before, but this time there was a second tread with it, heavier, slower, and a sound I knew the way you know your own name, the particular scuff and tap of Colonel Bracken's gate, the legacy of a knee shattered 30 years ago in a place none of us were ever told the name of. The master of the watch was coming up the East Range corridor. He was perhaps 70, broad and gray and built like a door himself, and he had run the watch at Harrowgate for longer than I had been alive in it. When he walked into a corridor, the corridor straightened up. I straightened up. But there was a third tread, too light, quick, uncertain, and when the three of them came around the turn by the window I saw who it was, and my stomach dropped because it was Mrs. Aldous, the princess's nurse. She was a small, sturdy, sensible woman of about 60 who had looked after the Dowager Princess for 11 years, and she was walking between the two men with her hands clasped in front of her and her face the color of paper, and she would not look at me. Comptroller Vance had brought her, I understood at once, as his confirmation. He had said he would bring me proof the princess was at Lindenhall, and here was the woman closest to the princess, brought to say so to my face. It was clever. It was very clever. The nurse's word would settle the question of where the old woman was far more completely than any folded paper, and it would do it in front of the colonel, and once that question was settled, my first reason was gone, and Vance would press hard on the second, and the second was thinner, a paper not shown, a signature not read, the kind of thing a tired sergeant could be argued out of by a determined controller and an impatient colonel at the end of a long day. "Sergeant Marlowe," said Colonel Bracken. His voice was a low gravel. "The controller tells me you've refused a clearance order on this post." "Yes, sir." "He tells me you suggested he was lying about the princess's whereabouts." "I told him she had not been moved past my post, sir. I came on watch at noon. No one has wheeled her out of these apartments while I've been standing here, and I'd have heard the chair." The colonel turned his head slowly and looked at Mrs. Aldous, and I saw the controller go very still beside her, and I understood that this was the hinge of the whole thing, this next moment, and that Vance had built it carefully and was now waiting to watch it swing his way. "Mrs. Aldous," said the colonel, "you're the princess's nurse. Where is she?" And Mrs. Aldous, who had not looked at me once, looked at me then. It was only for a moment. Her eyes came up off the floor and found mine, just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat I saw the whole of it, the fear and the apology, and underneath both, like a stone under water, something hard and unbroken that I had not expected and that I have been grateful for every day since. Then she looked at the colonel and she said, in a voice that shook only a little, "She's in her apartment, sir, behind that door. She was sleeping when I left her at 4. I've been with her since this morning, and no one has moved her anywhere, and there's no order from any physician to do so, because I'd have signed for it myself, and I haven't signed anything." She drew a breath. "The controller told me on the stairs just now that I was to confirm she'd been taken to Lindenhall. I won't, sir. Because it isn't true. I have stood in a great many silences in 19 years. That was the loudest one I ever stood in." Comptroller Vance did not move. To his very great credit as a creature of control, not one muscle of his face betrayed him. He simply stood there with his hands folded and his expression of pained patience, as though the nurse had said something embarrassing and slightly mad that a gentleman would politely overlook. But I was watching his hands, because I had learned long ago that the face lies last and the hands lie first, and I saw the right thumb press, once hard, into the side of the left forefinger. A small white crescent, the only thing in him that knew the floor had just gone out from under the whole scheme. Colonel Bracken looked at Vance for a long, slow moment. "Controller," he said, "you told me the princess had been moved this morning on a physician's order." "That was my understanding," said Vance without a flicker. "Plainly there has been a confusion in the household. The physician's office assured me the transfer was arranged. If the nurse contradicts it, then either the transfer was delayed without my being informed, which would be a serious failure of the office I am still in the process of putting in order, or the princess's people are reluctant to see her properly cared for, which I would understand, but cannot indulge." He turned the full weight of his smooth attention on the nurse. "Mrs. Aldous is devoted. Devotion is admirable. It is not always the same thing as good judgment about an elderly woman's care." It was beautifully done. In 4 sentences he had turned his own lie into a clerical muddle, made the nurse's truth into the sentimental stubbornness of a servant out of her depth, and reframed the entire business as a concerned reformer being obstructed by the disorganized old guard. If the colonel had been a lesser man, or a more tired one, it might have worked. I felt it nearly work. I felt the question begin, very slightly, to tilt back toward Vance. And then the colonel said the thing that changed everything, and he said it to me. "Sergeant Marlowe, the clearance order. The controller showed you a paper. Did you read it?" "No, sir. He held it up but did not give it to me. I saw the household seal and a signature, but I was not permitted close enough to read the signature." The colonel held out his broad gray hand to Controller Vance, palm up, and did not say a word. There are silences and there are silences. Vance looked at that open hand for what cannot have been more than 2 seconds but felt to all of us like a great deal longer, and I understood, we all understood, I think, even the footmen who had crept back up the corridor to watch, that the entire afternoon had narrowed to the question of whether a folded paper would be placed into the master of the watch's hand. And Controller Vance, smooth to the last, reached into his coat and produced the paper and laid it into the colonel's palm with a small courteous inclination of his head, as a man does who has nothing whatever to hide. The colonel unfolded it. He read it. I watched his face, and his face told me nothing because he had stood as many silences as I had and a good many more. He read it twice. Then he refolded it along its own creases, and he handed it back to Vance, and he said, in his low gravel, "This is signed by you, Controller. As is proper, the order of the rooms is my office. It cites a physician's transfer order as its authority. The transfer order, the nurse says, does not exist." "The transfer order," said Vance, "which I am sure the physician's office will produce the moment someone troubles to ask them for it." "Then we'll trouble them," said Colonel Bracken. "Tonight, before any crate leaves this corridor." He turned to me, and the old hard eyes that had drummed the 4 sentences into me on a wet parade ground 20 years before looked at me now with something I had never once seen in them before, which was approval. "Sergeant Marlowe holds his post. Nothing leaves these apartments, and nothing enters them, until I have a physician's order in my own hand and the Queen's household has confirmed it. That is my instruction, and it overrides yours, Controller, because the watch answers to me and not to your office. Are we clear?" "Perfectly," said Vance. But I was watching his hands, and his thumb had not let go of his forefinger, and I knew that we were not clear at all. We were nowhere near clear. We had only just begun. Controller Vance withdrew with great dignity, which is the thing the dangerous ones always have, and the loud ones never do. He gathered his footmen with a glance and went back down the corridor at the same brisk pace he had come, and he did not look back, and he did not take the trolley, and the abandoned trolley sitting there in the thin light somehow said more about how the afternoon had gone than anything any of us had spoken aloud. The colonel stayed a moment. He sent Mrs. Aldous back inside to sit with the princess, and bolt the inner door, madam, and open it to no one but the sergeant's voice. And then he stood with me in the corridor for a little while, the two of us, an old soldier and a younger one, in the place where I had just refused an order and lived. "You were close to wrong," he said at last. "You know that." "Sorry." If the nurse had buckled. If she'd said what he wanted on the stairs and then said it again to me, and he chose her precisely because he thought she would, a frightened servant against the controller of the household, then your first reason was gone, and your second reason was a paper you hadn't read, and I'd have had to weigh a sergeant's instinct against a controller's seal, and you'd not have liked which way that weighs in a watch log. He looked at me steadily. "You weren't right because you reason it out, Marlowe. You were right because you're an honest man who'd stood that corridor long enough to know the truth in his feet before his head caught up. That's worth a great deal. It's also nearly worthless in front of a board of inquiry against a paper with a seal on it. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes, sir." "Understand this too." He lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear. "I have run this watch for 40 years, and I have seen controllers come and go, and I have never in my life seen one move on an old woman's furniture 11 weeks into his post with a forged physician's order in his coat. Furniture, Marlowe. A recluse princess the newspapers have forgotten, 91 years old, no power, no faction, nothing to take. Ask yourself the question I'm asking myself. What is in those rooms?" I had not asked myself the question. I had been too busy refusing to ask any questions at all, which is a guardsman's discipline, and also, I was beginning to see, a guardsman's blindness. The colonel had asked the right one. A man does not forge a transfer order and bring footmen and a porter and a flat trolley to throw a forgotten woman's sandalwood and chairs into a service yard as refuse. There was no profit in furniture. There was no power in furniture. Vance had not come for the things. He had come for one thing among the things, and the cheapest way to take one thing without anyone noticing which thing was taken is to take all of them at once and call it a clearance. "I don't know, sir," I said, "but I think you've just told me he does." The colonel nodded slowly. "I'll send to the physician's office tonight and to the Queen's private secretary, and we'll have the whole muddle straightened by morning, and likely it'll come to nothing and I'll feel a fool for the dramatics." He did not believe that. I could hear that he did not believe it. "But until morning this post is the most important post in Harrowgate, and you're the man on it. Double watch. I'll send Hale up to stand the far end of the corridor at the turn, so you've eyes on the only other approach. No one enters these apartments. No one. Not a footman with a tray, not a maid with linen, not the controller himself with the Queen's own seal, not unless I am standing beside him when he asks, 'Do you hear me?' If anything at all comes up this corridor that you don't like the smell of, you send Hale for me at the run and you hold the door. Can you do that?" "I can, sir." "I know you can. That's why you're still standing there and not on a charge." He clapped me once on the shoulder, a thing he had never done in 20 years, and turned to go. Then he stopped and looked back and said the last thing, the thing I have carried since. "The reason men like Vance always lose to men like you in the end, Marlowe, when they lose at all, which is not as often as it should be, is that they think discipline is obedience. They think a guardsman is a paper that does what's written on it. They never understand, until it's too late for them, that real discipline isn't doing what you're told. It's refusing to do what's wrong and holding the line while they bring you bigger and bigger reasons to give in. You held it once today. You'll likely have to hold it again before this is done. Hold it." And he went, scuff and tap, down the corridor and around the turn, and a few minutes later young Hale came up to take the far post. A serious lad of 23 who had been on the watch 2 years and asked me no questions, which I was grateful for, and the east range settled into the long blue dusk, and I stood my door. I had a great deal of time to think that night, and I spent some of it thinking about the Princess Ushold, whom I had guarded for a year and never once spoken to. I knew her only through the small evidences of her days, the little brass bell, the Sunday letter, the chair at the south window, and the rooks. Mrs. Aldous had told me, over the months, The things a nurse tells the man who stands the door, small confidences traded in the long boredom of a quiet corridor. That the princess had been a great beauty once, and a great rider, and had broken her collarbone twice before she was 20. That she had married late and married for love, a younger son of a minor northern house, a serious quiet man named Tobias who had no fortune and no prospects, and whom the family had thought beneath her, and that she had not cared a straw and married him anyway, and that they had been, by every account, completely happy for 11 years until the morning they brought her the news from the mountains. That she had never remarried, and never wanted to, and that the sandalwood box held 31 years of a dead man's letters which she read one of, every Sunday, in order, beginning again at the first when she reached the last. I had thought when Mrs. Aldous told me that it was the saddest thing I had ever heard. Standing the door that night, I began to think it might be the strongest. A woman who had loved one man and lost him and spent the next 3 decades refusing to let the loss make her smaller, who had simply gone on, quietly, reading his words in his own hand, watching his rooks come up off his elms, in the rooms they had been happy in. There is a kind of fidelity in that which has nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with honor. She was keeping faith with a promise no one but a dead man and herself had ever heard. And a smooth new controller wanted those rooms emptied into a yard by nightfall, the box and the letters and all, as refuse. I did not yet know why, but somewhere around 2 in the morning, standing in the dark with Hale a silent shape at the far turn and the old wing creaking around me, I understood that the box mattered. I did not know how I understood it. Call it the same thing that had told me at 4:20 that the order was about to come down. But I understood that whatever Vance had truly come for, it was small, and it was personal, and it was the kind of thing a woman keeps on her writing desk. And I made up my mind that if it came to it, if the bigger reasons came up that corridor as the colonel had warned they would, I would not let the box go. Not the chairs, not the linen, not the portraits if it truly came to a clearance. But not the box, never the box. I did not yet know how right I was, but I had guessed the shape of it, and in this business, guessing the shape of it is half the war. The first move came at 3:20 in the morning, and it was so quiet and so reasonable that I nearly missed it for what it was. A maid came up the East Range corridor with a folded stack of linen and a soft, apologetic step. I knew her by sight, Nell, one of the night floor girls, a good worker, no harm in her. She came up to my door and said the controller's office had sent her to change the bed in the princess's spare dressing room, the small inner room off the apartments, because there was to be an inspection of the bedding in the morning. She was sorry to disturb me. She had the order written on a slip. Could she just slip in for 10 minutes? It was perfect. It was a maid with linen at 3 in the morning with a written slip, asking to enter for the most innocent reason in the world. If I let her through, she would be in the apartments, alone in the dark, near the writing desk, for 10 unwatched minutes, and a folded paper or a small sandalwood box is a very easy thing for a frightened girl to carry out under a stack of sheets, if a frightened girl has been told she must. I do not believe Nell knew what she was being used for. I believe she had been handed a slip and a story by a footman she dared not refuse, and sent up to do exactly what I had been ordered, an hour earlier, never to allow. "I'm sorry, Nell," I said gently, because none of it was her fault. "No one's to enter these apartments tonight. Colonel Bracken's standing order. Not for linen, not for anything. You take that slip back to whoever gave it you and tell them the master of the watch said no one, and if they've a quarrel with it they can bring it to him in the morning." She went pale, and then she went, almost at a run, and I knew by the way she ran that she had been more afraid of coming up than of going back, which told me a good deal about who had sent her. I sent Hale down to walk her to the night floor and see her safe, and to mark who she reported to. He came back 20 minutes later and told me she had gone straight to a footman named Corbin, one of the 2 who had stood behind Vance that afternoon, and that Corbin had taken her into the controller's anteroom and shut the door. So, Not even a day, and the second attempt already, dressed as bedlinen. The colonel had been right. They would keep coming, and each time the reason would be better. I did not sleep, and I was not relieved at 6, because the colonel had ordered the double watch held until the matter was settled, and so I stood the dawn, gray and cold and rook-loud, into the morning. And the morning brought the midpoint of the whole affair, and it brought it up the corridor in the person of a man I had not met, walking beside Colonel Bracken, and one look at the colonel's face told me the ground had shifted again. The man was perhaps 40, sleek and quick-eyed, with a leather folder under his arm, and the colonel introduced him without warmth as Mr. Pell, of the household physician's office. And Mr. Pell had brought a physician's transfer order for the Dowager Princess Ushold, dated the previous morning, signed and stamped and entirely in order, authorizing her removal to the Lindenhall convalescent wing for her health and the consequent clearance of her apartments. It was a forgery. I knew it was a forgery the way I had known the first paper was wrong, because I had stood that door and no order had come down the day before, and no one had wheeled the old woman anywhere. But it did not look like a forgery. It looked, the colonel told me grimly, exactly like every other transfer order the physician's office had produced for 30 years, on the right paper, in the right hand, with the right stamp. Because, as we would learn, the right hand and the right stamp now answered, like so much else in Harrowgate that autumn, to the Comptroller's office. Vance had spent his 11 weeks not reorganizing the silver as it had appeared, but quietly threading his own people into the small offices through which authority flows. The physician's clerk, 2 footmen, a man in the records room, so that when he needed a paper to exist, the paper could be made to exist after the fact, and look as though it always had. "He's produced it overnight," the colonel said, low, while Pell stood smiling by the window with his folder. "Backdated. The clerk in the physician's office is one of his. I can smell it, Marlowe, and I can prove not one word of it, and that's the trap. Yesterday he had a paper you wouldn't read. Today he has a paper that survives reading. He's moved the whole thing up a level overnight, and now it's not a sergeant's instinct against a controller's seal. It's a sergeant's instinct against a stamped medical order from the proper office. And a stamped order from the proper office is exactly the thing your own training tells you to obey." He was right, and the rightness of it sat in my chest like a stone, because here at last was the real test of the 4 sentences. The day before had been easy, an unread paper, a lie the nurse had broken, an instinct in my feet. This was the hard one. This was a lawful-looking order, properly formed, from the proper office, and everything in 19 years of training screamed at me to obey it, because the whole point of a guardsman is that he does not get to decide which proper orders are real. If guardsmen started refusing stamped orders on a feeling, the watch would fall apart in a week. Vance had not just forged a paper. He had aimed the very thing that made me disciplined, my trained reflex to obey, straight back at the door I was guarding, like turning a man's own sword in his hand. And then Mr. Pell, sleek by the window, made the mistake the clever ones always make, which is to gild it. "Of course," he said smoothly, snapping his folder shut, "the kindest thing now is speed. The poor lady's been left in unsuitable rooms a full day past her transfer through no one's fault, and the longer her things sit here gathering dust the more distressing it'll be for her when she's settled. I'd suggest we clear the apartments this morning and have everything boxed and delivered to Lindenhall by noon, so she can have her familiar things about her. The Comptroller's quite right to want it done quickly. It's a mercy, really. Delivered to Lindenhall, to her familiar things about her." He had improved the story again. Yesterday the things were refused for the service yard. Today they were a kindness to be delivered to the dear lady's bedside. And it was a better story and a warmer one, and I watched the colonel hesitate, just for a breath, because it is very hard to refuse a kindness, and I felt the question begin once more to tilt. But I had stood that door for a year, and Mr. Pell had not, and Mr. Pell did not know the one thing that broke his beautiful story across my knee like a stick. Because there was no princess at Lindenhall to deliver familiar things to. The Princess Usselt was 30 feet behind me, asleep behind a bolted inner door, with her nurse beside her, exactly where she had been every day of the year I had guarded her. You cannot deliver an old woman's things to her bedside in a wing she is not in. And the moment I said so, the moment the words formed in my mouth, I saw, finally, all at once, the whole monstrous simplicity of what Vance was doing, and why he needed the rooms empty, and what he had really come for. He did not want her things moved. He wanted her gone, not killed, nothing so crude. He wanted her erased. A transfer order that said she had left these rooms, a clearance that emptied them, a wing she had supposedly been sent to. Inch by inch, paper by paper, he was building a Harrowgate in which the Dowager Princess Usselt had quietly ceased to be a presence. Anyone had to reckon with moved out, cleared away, filed under done, so that when the time came for whatever he truly intended, there would be no rooms, no nurse, no sergeant, no inconvenient old woman with a box on her desk to contradict the version of events he meant to write. And the box, it always came back to the box. Whatever was in that sandalwood box, it was the one thing his erasure could not survive, the one object that, if it ever came to light, would tear his whole careful architecture down. He did not want it delivered to Lindenhall. He wanted it gone. And he had nearly, twice now, walked it out the door under a clearance and a kindness. And the only thing that had stopped him was a sergeant who knew, in his feet, that the old woman had never left her rooms. "Sir," I said to the colonel very quietly so that Pell could not hear, "ask Mr. Pell which room at Lindenhall the princess is in, and then send a man to that room, because she isn't in it. She's behind me, and a transfer order to a place she never went is a forged transfer order, however good the stamp." The colonel's eyes met mine, and I watched the trap that had been closing around him spring open the other way. "Mr. Pell," he said, turning, his voice all easy courtesy, "excellent. We'll do exactly as you say, clear the rooms and deliver everything to the princess at Lindenhall this morning. Tell me which room she's in, so I can send a man ahead to receive the boxes and make sure her familiar things are set up properly. Ward, room number. The lady mustn't be kept waiting." It was beautifully done, better than anything Vance or Pell had managed, because it used their own kindness as the knife. Pell could not now refuse to name a room without admitting there was no room, and Pell, sleek and quick as he was, had not been given a room number, because the people who forge a transfer order rarely think to forge the destination as well. They are so busy making the leaving look real that they forget to make the arriving look real too. He recovered well. "I'd have to confirm with the wing," he said smoothly. "They reassign beds. I wouldn't want to send your man to the wrong ward." "Then confirm it now," said the colonel, and he held out his hand for Pell's folder the way he had held out his hand for Vance's paper, and there is a kind of man whom that open hand finishes, and Pell was that kind. He did not give up the folder. He said he would telephone the wing and return within the hour, and he gathered himself with a great deal less dignity than Vance had managed and went off down the corridor at a pace that was not quite a walk, and he did not come back within the hour, and he did not come back at all. But I want to be honest about that morning, because it would be a poor account that pretended the truth saved us neatly. The Lindenhall lie was broken. The colonel sent a man to the wing within the half-hour and confirmed what I already knew, that no Dowager Princess Usselt had been admitted, that no bed had been reserved, that no one there had heard a word of any transfer. That should have ended it. In a just and tidy world, that single confirmed fact would have ended it, and Vance would have been summoned and dismissed, and I would have nothing more to tell you. But Comptroller Vance had not survived 11 weeks of quietly threading his people through Harrowgate by being the sort of man a single confirmed fact could finish. He had a deeper move, and when the Lindenhall lie collapsed under him, he did not panic. He changed the war entirely. He stopped fighting about furniture and stopped fighting about transfers and went, that same afternoon, to the only authority in the building above the master of the watch. He went to the Queen. I learned the shape of it that evening, when the colonel came up to the East Range looking 10 years older than he had at dawn, and told me to walk a little way with him out of Hale's hearing, and laid it out. Vance had requested and been granted an audience with Her Majesty Queen Saralind, on a matter, he said, of the gravest delicacy concerning the succession and the honor of the House of Harrowgate. He had gone in with his sleek folder and his immaculate coat, and he had told the Queen a story, and the story was this: that the Dowager Princess Ushold, in her great age and failing mind, had become the unwitting keeper of certain documents, old papers, of no real standing but inflammatory, which, if they fell into the wrong hands, could be used to mount a fraudulent challenge to the line of succession itself. That there were people, he would not yet name them, who knew of these papers and meant to seize them. That the only safe and discreet course was to remove the princess to proper care, quietly clear and secure her apartments, and take the dangerous papers into the protection of the household, where they could be examined and, if necessary, destroyed before they did harm. That he had tried to do all this quietly, as a loyal servant should, to spare Her Majesty and the old princess any distress, and that he had been obstructed, at every turn, by an aged nurse and a stubborn sergeant who did not understand the stakes, and were, however unwittingly, doing the work of the very people who meant to use those papers against the crown. It was, the colonel said, a masterpiece, because it took every true fact that there were papers, that the rooms had been a target, that the nurse and I had blocked the clearance, and bent each one a quarter turn until the whole picture stood on its head. We had not protected the princess. We had endangered the crown. The papers were not the old woman's treasure. They were a danger to the throne. And Vance was not the thief. He was the loyal man trying to make the danger safe, hindered by fools. And the worst of it, the colonel said heavily, is that he's half right about the danger, which is what makes it so deadly. There are papers. We both feel it. And if there are papers in that box that touch the succession, then the Queen cannot simply wave Vance away, because if he's telling the truth, even by accident, even for the wrong reasons, then those papers genuinely do need to be secured, and a sergeant standing a door on instinct is exactly the wrong thing to have between the crown and a threat to itself. He's made it so that the careful, responsible, queenly thing to do is the very thing he wants. He's turned your honesty into the danger, and his theft into the duty. Do you see how good it is? I saw it the way you see a wave that is going to break over you and cannot get out of its way. The man had taken the strongest thing we had, the truth, and turned even that around, so that now the more we insisted there were valuable papers in the box, the more we proved his point that the box was dangerous and ought to be in the household's hands. If we said the box held nothing, we lied. If we said the box held something, we armed him. There is a particular kind of trap that closes whichever way you move, and we were in it. What did the Queen say? I asked. She listened, the colonel said. She's no fool, the Queen, whatever Vance hopes. She didn't give him the clearance, but she didn't refuse it either. She's ordered the apartments sealed and guarded, which they are by you, until the matter can be examined properly, and she's appointed a small commission to open and review the contents of the princess's rooms in her own presence tomorrow at noon, to determine what's there and what's to be done with it. He looked at me. Vance asked to be on the commission, as Comptroller of the household. And the Queen, not yet knowing what we suspect, and seeing no reason a senior officer of her household shouldn't help review her own aunt's effects, said yes. The blood went cold in me. Then he'll be in the room when the box is opened. He'll be standing right there. He'll be standing right there, said the colonel. Which means whatever is in that box, he'll have one chance in front of the Queen with a commission's authority to name it harmless, or name it dangerous, or make it vanish into an evidence bag for the household's safekeeping. and he is a great deal better at standing in rooms and making things mean what he wants them to mean than you or I or a frightened nurse will ever be. We've held the door for 2 days, Marlowe. Tomorrow at noon they open it lawfully, with the Queen's own commission, and there's no door left to hold. The only question is what's in the box, and whether the truth of it is strong enough to survive being in a room with a man like Vance. And I stood my post that second long night, with everything I had refused for 2 days about to be lawfully undone at noon, and I thought, it all comes down to the box, to one object on a dead man's writing desk, and whatever the Princess Usselt had been keeping faith with for 31 years. I did not know what was in it, but I was about to. It was Mrs. Aldous who opened the inner door to me, near 11 that night, and said the princess was awake and asking of all things for the sergeant who had stood her door for a year, and whom she had never thanked. I had never been inside the apartments. A guardsman stands the door, he does not cross it. But the colonel had said no one entered except in his presence or mine, and these were strange days, and the old woman was asking, and so I gave my rifle to Hale, and I took off my bearskin and went in my shirt-sleeves and my discipline, into the rooms I had guarded for a year and never seen. They were not grand. That was the first thing. A sitting room, a bedroom beyond, the small dressing room the maid had been sent for, worn good furniture, faded hangings, a great many books, and on every surface the small sediment of a long-life miniatures, a riding crop kept for sentiment, a watercolor of a northern valley, dried flowers 30 years past their bloom. And at the south window, in a wheeled chair with a rug over her knees, sat the Dowager Princess Usselt of Harrowgate, 91 years old, very small, very upright, with a face like fine paper folded 1,000 times and eyes that were perfectly, alarmingly clear. "Sergeant Marlowe," she said. Her voice was thin, but it did not waver. "Sit down. I have something to give you and not much time to give it in, and I find I do not wish to be a coward about it." I sat. On the writing desk within her reach was the sandalwood box. "They tell me," she said, "that there is a man in my nephew's household, my great-nephew's, I cannot keep the generation straight any longer, who wishes my rooms emptied and my things taken away, and that you have stood at my door for 2 days and would not let him. Is that so?" "It is, ma'am." "Why?" It was the same question everyone asked, and I gave her the only answer I had. "Because the order was wrong, ma'am, and I will not carry out a wrong order. That's all it ever was." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something I did not expect, which was to laugh, a small dry rustle of a laugh like leaves. "That's all it ever was," she repeated. "Do you know, young man, I have spent 91 years in palaces, among the cleverest people in the kingdom, and I have almost never heard anyone say a sentence so simple and so true. They are all so clever. That is what is wrong with them. You are not clever, are you, Sergeant? You are something a great deal rarer." She reached out and laid her thin hand on the lid of the box. "Let me tell you why this man wants my rooms emptied, so that you understand what you have been guarding. And then I am going to give it to you, because I do not trust a commission, and I do not trust a household, and I have learned in 91 years that the only people you can trust with a dangerous truth are the ones too honest to find it useful." And she told me. The man they called the late king's elder sister had married, as I knew, a younger son of a minor northern house, quiet Tobias, beneath her, married for love. What I had not known, what almost no one living knew, was the rest of it. That Tobias had not been so minor as the family pretended. That his line, the old northern house of Marwood, held an ancient and entirely lawful place in the succession of Harrowgate, distant, dormant, a branch everyone had forgotten, and that when Usselt married him, the family had been less worried about his lack of fortune than about the line he carried, because a child of that marriage would have stood, by the old law, surprisingly near the throne. That she and Tobias had been happy for 11 years and had no living children, the two they had borne not having survived infancy, and so the question had seemed to die with them. And that the documents proving the Marwood place in the succession, the original settlement, the patents, the old king's own sealed acknowledgment of the line had passed to Ushold on Tobias's death, and she had kept them, all 31 years, in the bottom of the sandalwood box beneath his letters, because they were the last lawful thing of his that she possessed, and she would not destroy them though the family had begged her to. "They are nothing," she said. "Do you understand? They are nothing, a dead line, a forgotten branch, 2 babies in the chapel crypt. There is no Marwood left to claim anything. I am the last of it, and I am 91, and when I die the whole question dies with me as it should." Her clear eyes held mine. "But they are not nothing to a clever man, because while those documents exist, a clever man could forge a Marwood heir, find some distant cousin, manufacture a descent, and produce the ancient sealed pats to give the fraud a foundation no one could easily disprove, because the pats themselves are real. The danger was never that the Marwood line would claim the throne. The danger is that someone would invent a Marwood claimant and use my Tobias's true papers to dress the lie in truth. Do you see? The papers are real. That is what makes them dangerous. An honest set of documents in a dishonest man's hands." I saw all of it at last whole. Vance's story to the Queen had not been a lie at all. That was the terrible cleverness of it. There were papers. They could be used to mount a fraudulent claim. He had told the Queen the exact truth, and then offered himself as the loyal man who would take the dangerous papers into safe keeping and destroy them. And once they were in his hands, under cover of protecting the crown, he would not destroy them at all. He would keep them. And somewhere, in some patient future, a Marwood claimant would appear from nowhere with the old king's own sealed patents to prove a descent, and Comptroller Vance, or whoever stood behind him, would hold the king-making papers and the throne itself. "He doesn't want to burn them," I said slowly. "He wants to own them." "Now you understand," said the Princess Ushold, "what your 2 days at my door were worth." She lifted the lid of the box. Beneath a thick bundle of letters tied in faded ribbon, 31 years of a dead man's words, lay a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with a great disk of crimson wax stamped with a crest I did not know. She lifted it out, both thin hands trembling under its weight, and held it out to me. "Take it, not to the commission, not to the household. To the Queen herself, into her own hand, and to no one between. Tell her what I have told you. She is a good woman, my great niece. She will know what to do with the truth once she has it whole and not in a clever man's mouth." Her clear eyes glittered. "And then bring the box back to me with my Tobias's letters still in it, Sergeant, for I have not finished reading them, and I do not intend to die before I reach the last one and begin again." I took the packet. It was heavier than its size, the way true things often are. And that, by every right, should have been the moment the war was won, the truth in my hands, the plan to carry it straight to the Queen, the clever man's whole scheme exposed by the very object he had been hunting. It was the false dawn. I should have known. There is always a false dawn, and the deeper the relief, the harder the floor that is about to open. Because when I came back out into the corridor, with the oilcloth packet inside my tunic against my heart, and the box left safe with the princess, young Hale was not at the far turn where I had left him, and Colonel Bracken standing order that no one entered or left without the sergeant or the colonel, had been, in the half-hour I spent inside, quietly set aside by a paper that outranked even the master of the watch. There was a man in the corridor I had never seen, in the dark plain coat of the Queen's own private office, and he had a writ in his hand, and the writ bore the Queen's personal seal, and it commanded that the Princess Ushold's apartments and all their contents be placed at once under the seal and custody of the Household Commission, pending tomorrow's review, every paper, every object, everything, and that the watch was to be stood down from the door and the keys surrendered. The Queen had sealed the room, lawfully, with her own hand, and the man with the writ was holding out his palm for the keys, and behind him, immaculate and smiling, having played his last and best card straight from the hand of the sovereign herself, stood Comptroller Vance. I want to tell you exactly what went through me in the next 10 seconds, because everything turns on it, and because it is the closest I have ever come, in 19 years, to obeying an order I knew to be the instrument of a wrong. This was not a forged paper. This was not a clerk's stamp bought with 11 weeks of patient corruption. This was the Queen's own writ, the Queen's own seal, lawfully sealing a room pending a lawful review, and every fiber of my training, every one of the 4 sentences, told me that an order from the sovereign herself, properly formed, is the one order a guardsman does not refuse, because the whole of our discipline rests on the crown, and a guardsman who refuses the crown is not a guardsman at all but a man with a gun and an opinion. If I refused this, I was not holding the line. I was breaking it. The thing that had made me right for 2 days obey the lawful, refuse the unlawful, now pointed straight at surrender because this order was lawful. The Queen had signed it. There was no flaw in it to feel in my feet. And Vance knew it. That was why he was smiling. He had not beaten the watch. He had gone over it, to the one authority the watch could not refuse, and he had told the Queen exactly enough truth to make sealing the room the careful, responsible, sovereign thing to do. And now the room would be sealed, and tomorrow at noon the commission would open it in his presence, and the oilcloth packet would be found in the box, or rather it would not be found, because he would see to that. And either way the truth would pass through his hands wearing the Queen's own authority. And there would be nothing anyone could ever prove. He had built a trap that closed even on the throne. But he had made one mistake, the same mistake the clever ones always make. He had been so busy capturing the room that he had forgotten to capture the man. The writ sealed the apartments and all their contents. It commanded the keys surrendered and the watch stood down. It said not one word about the sergeant, because Vance, who thought a guardsman was a paper that does what is written on it, had not imagined that the most dangerous thing in the East Range that night was not in the box at all. It was inside my tunic, against my heart, where I had put it 20 minutes before the writ ever arrived. The packet was already out of the room. It was out of the room before the room was sealed. The Princess Usselt, who did not trust a commission, or a household, or even, it turned out, the careful instruments of her own great-niece's authority, and who had learned in 91 years that a dangerous truth is only safe in honest hands, had put it into mine, while Vance was still drafting his masterpiece for the Queen. The seal Vance had won with such patience sealed an empty hiding place. He had captured the box. He had not captured what had been in it. So I understood in those 10 seconds that I did not have to refuse the Queen's writ at all. That was the gift of it, and I have thanked God for it since, because I do not know that I could have refused the Queen. I could obey the writ to the letter, surrender the keys, stand the watch down, let the room be sealed exactly as Her Majesty commanded, and it would change nothing because the writ commanded me to give up a room, and the room was not where the truth was. The truth was going where the princess had told me to take it, to the Queen herself, into her own hand, to no one between. And the man between, the man whose entire scheme depended on standing between the Queen and the truth, on being the one who carried it, named it, handled it, made it mean what he wanted, was standing right in front of me, smiling, certain he had won. "Sergeant," said the man in the dark coat not unkindly, "the keys, and then you're relieved, the Queen's order." "Yes, sir," I said. And I took the keys to the outer door off my belt, and I laid them in his open palm, every one, and I stood the watch down from the door exactly as Her Majesty had commanded, because it was a lawful order from my sovereign, and I am a guardsman, and I obey the lawful order. Vance's smile broadened. He had expected me to fight, to bluster, to refuse and be dragged away on a charge, to make myself the obstructionist his story to the Queen had already painted me. Instead I obeyed, instantly and completely, and I saw a flicker of something almost like contempt cross his face, the contempt of the clever man for the simple one who does as he is told. He should have remembered that I do as I am told, only when what I am told is right. "Then I'll bid you all good night," said Vance smoothly, "and we'll settle the rest at noon before the commission before Her Majesty in the proper way." He inclined his head, every inch the loyal servant vindicated. "You've caused a great deal of trouble, Sergeant, over an old woman's furniture. I hope you'll reflect on that." "I'm sure I will, sir," I said. And then I did the only thing left to do, the thing the writ had not forbidden because Vance had never imagined it, the thing 2 days of holding a door had been for. I did not go to the guardroom to be relieved. I turned and I walked, not fast, not slow, the steady measured pace of a guardsman who is exactly where he is meant to be, down the East Range corridor around the turn, past where Hale should have stood. And I kept walking, through the old wing and across the cold gallery and down the great stair, with the oilcloth packet against my heart, toward the one place in Harrowgate where Comptroller Vance's whole architecture could not follow me. Toward the Queen. I knew I would not be allowed to simply walk into her presence. A sergeant of the watch does not request an audience with the sovereign. The thought is almost comic. But I knew, too, that the colonel was somewhere in the building, and that the colonel believed me, and that the colonel had spent 40 years building the one thing Vance, for all his cleverness, had never bothered to build, the trust of the men around him. And I knew that the Queen had appointed a commission to review her aunt's effects at noon, which meant the Queen was already uneasy, already half awake to the wrongness of it, already a woman who had listened to Vance and not given him his clearance. She had sealed the room not because she believed him, but because she did not yet have the truth whole, and a wise sovereign who does not have the truth whole secures everything and waits. I had the truth whole. I had it from the Princess Isolde's own mouth and her own hand, the night before the commission, before Vance could stand in a room and bend it a quarter turn. If I could put it into the Queen's hand before noon, before Vance stood between her and the box and made it mean what he wished, then the whole trap that closed every other way would have nothing left to close on, because the thing it was built to capture would already be past it, in the one pair of hands in the kingdom that outranked the controller of the household. I found Colonel Bracken in the watch room off the great stair, gray and grim, drafting what I think was his resignation. He looked up when I came in, and he saw my face, and he was on his feet before I had said a word. "They sealed the room," he said. "The Queen's own writ. There was nothing I could do, Marlowe, nothing. She signed it herself. I'd no ground to stand on." "Sir," I said, and I drew the oilcloth packet out from against my heart and laid it on the table between us, the great crimson seal turned up, the crest of the old house of Marwood catching the lamplight. "The room is sealed, but the box was empty before they sealed it. The princess gave me this an hour ago with her own hands and told me to carry it to the Queen and to no one between. It's the truth Vance has been hunting. It's the thing he can't survive. And I need you to get me in front of Her Majesty before noon, before that commission opens an empty box and Vance stands up to explain why." Colonel Bracken looked at the packet on the table for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and the old hard eyes that had drummed the 4 sentences into me on a wet parade ground filled, just for an instant, with something I had never seen in them in 20 years. "You held the door," he said quietly. "I held the door, sir." "Then by God we'll finish it." He swept up the packet and his sword and his 40 years of standing where he was told and watching who came and went, and he turned for the door. "Come with me, Sergeant. We're going to wake the Queen." We did not in the end wake her. Queen Saralind was already awake. I learned later that she had not slept at all that night, that she had sent Vance away from his audience with the sealing writ granted but her mind uneasy, and that she had sat up in her private study turning the whole strange business over, an aged aunt, a sudden urgency, a controller 11 weeks in his post who knew a very great deal about papers that touched the succession. She was, as the princess had said, no fool. The story had been good. But the best stories, told to a wise listener, leave a faint wrongness in the air after the teller has gone, like a scent you cannot name. And the Queen had been sitting alone with that scent for 3 hours when the master of the watch requested, at 1 in the morning, an urgent audience on a matter concerning her aunt, and brought with him a sergeant of the watch and a sealed packet the Comptroller did not know existed. I will not pretend I remember that audience clearly. A man does not stand often in the presence of his sovereign, and the once or twice it has fallen to me, I have been too full of the weight of it to take careful notes. I remember a quiet, warm room, and a tall woman in a plain dark dressing gown with her hair down and an absolutely steady gaze, and that she did not sit while she listened, and that she made me, not the Colonel me, tell the whole of it from the beginning, from 4:20 on the first afternoon. The order, the trolley, the unread paper, the nurse, the maid with the linen, the forged transfer, the Lindenhall lie, and at the last the princess ustled at her south window, and the box. And what she had told me of Tobias, and the old house of Marwood, and the true papers in a false man's hands. And I remember that when I had finished, Queen Saralind was silent for a long time, and then she crossed the room and picked up the oilcloth packet from where the Colonel had laid it, and she broke the great crimson seal of the house of Marwood with her own hands, and she read what was inside by the lamp, every page slowly, while 2 soldiers stood at attention and the clock ticked toward 2 in the morning. When she set the papers down, her face had changed. Not to anger, to something colder and more dangerous than anger, the stillness of a sovereign who has just understood precisely how close a clever man came to making her his instrument. "He told me the truth," she said at last, very quietly. "That is what I could not get past sitting here. Every word he said to me was true. There are papers, they could arm a fraudulent claim, they ought to be secured." She looked up. "He told me the truth in order to make me do his theft for him. He used my own care for my house, my own caution, my own wish to do the responsible thing, and he turned each of them into a lever. If your sergeant had obeyed that first paper, Colonel, these would be in his hands tonight, and I would have signed the order that put them there and thanked him for his loyalty." Her steady eyes came to me. "You refused an order from the Comptroller of my household, Sergeant, on instinct, with nothing to go on but the fact that an old woman had not been wheeled past your post." "Yes, Your Majesty," I said. "I'm sorry if it was a great deal of trouble." And the Queen of Harrowgate looked at me for a moment, and then she did the thing I have never told anyone until I set it down here, because it does not belong in a watch log, and I have always felt it was hers and the princess's and mine and not the kingdom's. She smiled, a tired, true, entirely human smile, and she said, "My aunt was right about you. She told me, years ago, that the man on her door was the only person in the East Range who had never once tried to be clever at her, and that she trusted him more than the whole of my privy council. I thought she was being an old woman. I see now she was being the wisest person in my palace." She straightened, and the sovereign came back into her face, and the night's work began in earnest. "Now we have until noon and a commission to turn and a controller to catch in the open. Tell me, Colonel, how would you like to do this properly?" What they did beautifully, and I had only a small part in it, which is as it should be. The great corrections of the world are not made by sergeants. The commission met at noon, as Vance had arranged, in the East Range before the sealed door, with the Queen present as she had ordered, and Comptroller Vance there too, immaculate and grave, ready to preside over the opening of his great-great-aunt's effects with all the wounded patience of a loyal man vindicated at last. He had his story ready. He had his evidence bags ready, I have no doubt, for the careful safe-keeping of any dangerous papers the commission might regrettably discover. He had everything ready except the one thing he could not have prepared for, which was that the Queen already knew. The seal was broken. The door was opened. The box was brought out and set upon a table before the commission, and opened, and inside it lay 31 years of a dead man's letters tied in faded ribbon, and beneath them, where the oilcloth packet should have been, nothing. An empty space the exact size and shape of a king-making lie. And I watched Comptroller Vance look into that empty box, and I watched the floor go out from under him at last, and this time his face did not lie last. This time, for one unguarded instant before he caught himself, I saw the whole of it cross his features. The disbelief, the calculation, the dawning understanding that the thing he had spent 2 days and 11 weeks and God knows how many years reaching for had been gone before he ever sealed the room, and that he did not know where, and that the not knowing was a noose. "It appears," said Queen Saralind into the silence in a voice like the closing of a vault, "that my aunt's most important papers are not in the box, Comptroller. How fortunate that they are safe. They were brought to me last night by the sergeant whose stubbornness over an old woman's furniture has caused you, I understand, a great deal of trouble. I have read them, all of them. I think you know what is in them. I think you have known for a very long time exactly what is in them, and exactly what they are worth, and exactly to whom." She let that sit. "Would you care to explain to this commission, Comptroller, why a man entrusted with the order of my household forged a physician's order, corrupted my clerks, sent a frightened maid to enter a sealed apartment by night, and told his sovereign a careful skein of truths in order to take into his own hands the one set of documents in this kingdom that could be used to manufacture a false claim upon my throne? He tried. I will give him that to the very end. He was a creature of control, and even with the floor gone he reached, smooth as ever, for the next key. There had been a confusion. The papers were exactly what he had warned of. He had only ever sought to make them safe. The sergeant and the nurse had endangered the crown through ignorance. He could explain everything if only Her Majesty would hear him privately. But there is no key that opens a door the sovereign herself is holding shut, and the more he talked, the more the careful skein of truths unwound into exactly what it had always been, and by the end even the other members of the commission, household men who had been prepared to defer to the controller of the household, were looking at him the way you look at a thing that has been pretending to be furniture and has just moved. He was arrested in the East Range corridor, not 30 feet from the door I had held, by men of the watch under Colonel Bracken's own hand. He did not resist. He went immaculate and silent, and the last I saw of him was his straight retreating back as they walked him down the corridor and around the turn, and I confess I felt no triumph in it, only the long, flat tiredness of a man who has held something heavy for a great while and has finally been allowed to set it down. The unraveling of the rest of it was the kingdom's business and not mine, and I will give it to you briefly. Vance had not been working alone, though he had nearly taken the whole weight alone. There were others, a distant connection of his own whom he had meant in time to dress as the lost Marwood heir, and 2 or 3 men in small offices of the household whose loyalty he had bought or frightened. The forged transfer order led to the corrupted clerk. The clerk led to the footman Corbin. Corbin, faced with the choice between the truth and the long dark road his master had taken, chose the truth. One thread pulled and the whole patient 11-week weaving came apart, because that is the nature of a thing built on lies. It holds beautifully until one honest refusal snags it, and then it has no honest fiber anywhere to hold the rest together. The papers, Tobias's true papers, the old House of Marwood's lawful and entirely harmless place in a succession that died with a 91-year-old woman, were taken into the Queen's own keeping, examined by people she trusted, and laid quietly to rest where no clever man would ever reach them again. Mrs. Aldous, who had looked into my eyes in the corridor on the first afternoon, and then told the master of the watch the truth when a lie would have been so much safer, was thanked by the Queen herself, and went back to her princess, and so far as I know is with her still. Young Hale, who had been drawn off his post that night by an order he had no way to know was Vance's last gambit, was cleared of any fault. A guardsman cannot be blamed for obeying what looks like a lawful order, and the boy had done nothing but what the writ told him, and he is a corporal now, and a good one, and he has never once let himself be drawn off a post since, which is the only lesson worth taking from a night like that. Colonel Bracken did not, in the end, submit the resignation I had seen him drafting. He tore it up. He told me, in his gravel, that a man does not resign in the same week his watch has just done the finest thing it has done in 40 years, because it would look like he was taking the credit, and that the credit was mine and the nurse's and a stubborn old woman's, and he would be damned if he would steal it by quitting. And the Princess Usselt got her box back. I carried it to her myself, when it was all over, the sandalwood box with the 31 years of letters tied in faded ribbon still inside it, exactly as she had asked, for she had not finished reading them and did not intend to die before she reached the last one and began again at the first. She was at her south window when I brought it, with the rug over her knees and the rooks coming up off the elms, and she took the box in her two thin hands and held it for a long moment, and then she looked up at me with her clear, alarming, 91-year-old eyes. "They keep asking me," I said, "why I refused. The first paper that first afternoon, before I knew any of it, before I knew about Tobias or the papers or any of what was in the box. They want there to have been some great reason. There wasn't. I didn't know what I was protecting, ma'am. I only knew the order was wrong." "And that," said the Princess Usselt, "is the whole of it and the reason it worked. If you had known what was in the box, Sergeant, you might have been clever about it, and a clever man can always be reached, bought, or frightened, or out-argued, or made to see the responsible thing his enemy has dressed up for him. You could not be reached because you were not protecting a treasure. You were protecting a principle. You refused a wrong order because it was wrong, and for no other reason on this earth, and there is no key in any clever man's coat that opens that door." She smiled her dry, rustling smile and set the box upon the writing desk where it had sat for 31 years. "The why everyone wants is so much smaller than they imagine. You did not move because it was not right to move. That is all it ever was. That is all it ever was. I am back at my post now. The East Range is quiet again, and the rooks still come up off the elms on clear mornings, and behind a particular oak door at the end of the longest corridor, an old woman reads one letter every Sunday, in order, beginning again at the first when she reaches the last. I stand her door. I do not cross it. When my watch ends I march off and another man marches on, and nothing about the wing tells you that anything ever happened there at all. But I know what I know. A guardsman is taught 4 sentences he may speak upon his post, and the one that matters is the one no one ever expects to need. I am sorry, sir. I can't do that. They will hand you a paper, one gray afternoon, and tell you to stand aside, and everything you have been trained to be will tell you to obey. And the whole of your honor, everything you are for, will come down to whether you can feel, in your feet before your head, the difference between the order you must obey and the order you must refuse, and whether you have the discipline to hold the harder of the two. That is the discipline, not obedience, the refusal and the standing while they bring you bigger reasons to give in. I held the door. That in the end was enough.